The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the program host and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by TCN TV Network Incorporated. Due to the social nature of this broadcasting channel, videos may contain content copyrighted by another entity or person. The TCN TV Network claims no rights to the said content. TCN TV Network cannot be held accountable for the copyrighted content. TCN TV Network is a messenger and sharer of information and strives to verify but cannot warrant the accuracy of copyrights or completeness of the information on this program.
Welcome to Shaping Life, where we discuss all things health and we connect with the right people and information to set us on a path to being our best selves. And I'm your host, Trish Curling. Today, I'm so excited about our topic today and about our guest. My very special guest today is Kim Vopni, also known as the Vagina Coach. So Kim Vopni wants women to know that light bladder leakage is not just a part of being a woman. She helps women optimize their pelvic floor health or their pelvic health in pregnancy, motherhood, and menopause with online programs and coaching. Kim holds a BA in psychology and a postgraduate diploma in health and fitness. She's a restorative exercise specialist, a certified personal trainer, a certified pre- and postnatal fitness consultant, a certified fitness for fertility specialist, a Pilates instructor, and a hypopressive method trainer. So the list goes on. Kim is obviously well qualified, and we're going to dig in today. And I'm so excited because I asked earlier when I posted about her being a guest today that, do you have a vagina? So yes, if you have one, you should definitely be listening. But if you don't, you also need to listen to this, okay? So Kim, welcome. So glad to have you today. Quite the resume.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me. I mean, those have all helped me get where I am, but I don't love when it's like listing off all these things. But anyway, it is part of the thing, I guess. But thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. I'm so happy to have you. Tell us where you're coming from to us today.
I'm in Port Moody, BC, which is like a suburb of Vancouver. And I wish I could be in the studio with you, but this is better. This is the next best thing, I guess. So
absolutely. And what's so great is that I was fortunate enough to do your core confidence specialist course with Bellies Inc. And what a tremendous experience for me. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But so grateful to be able to sit down with you and talk to you a bit about your story. And I know a bit about your story because of the fact that I did the course with you lovely ladies. There we are.
Awesome picture.
So I hope you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit with us today about how you've kind of come to this path and what kind of started you there.
Yeah, for sure. So basically it started really about my fear of childbirth. That's a weird start, but that's what it was. And I remember seeing a grade 6 video that was about childbirth, and I thought, okay, that's not something I'm going to do. And then I remember asking my mom questions because I was still kind of curious about it. And then she told me about her experience, and that was another kind of tick to say, nope, I'm not going to do that. And anyway, fast forward to when I was married and decided that I did want to start a family, and I watched my sister-in-law give birth, and that was an experience different from anything that I had seen in the media. And it really inspired me and empowered me. And I felt like, okay, I can do this. And I asked her what she had done. She used midwives. She had done perineal massage. And so the following year I was pregnant and looking to be as proactive as I possibly could. And I ended up using a biofeedback product that my midwives had recommended to me called the Epino. And I had great success, and I certainly credit my midwives and some of the birth positioning work that I did but I felt like it contributed to my positive birth experience, and I felt more women should know. So I contacted the company to ask if I could be a distributor, and I didn't intend it to be a business. I just thought it would be a side thing, I would tell some friends. And anyway, long story short, it ended up becoming a business in 2009 after I got laid off from my job. And I started to reach out to people, and I ended up finding Samantha, who was in that picture that you just showed.
Yes.
And her and I started talking about pelvic floor and the abdominal wall. And I had taken a training with a woman in New York and was trying to bring her protocol into Canada. And Sam went and took that same training. And we started selling this woman's products. And Julia was a physiotherapist, and she was referring clients to us. And we ended up sitting down for coffee with her one day. And the three of us sort of felt like what was out there was okay, better than nothing, but it could be done better. And we had a bit of a mission to change that. And so I had my business that had been started with selling the Epino and a couple of other products. And I had created a program called Prepare to Push for pregnant people.
Right.
And then my focus sort of went to creating this other company, Bellies Inc., with Sam and Julia. And we wanted to create a postpartum recovery garment and essentially a wrap. So what's used traditionally in other parts of the world, we wanted to make it a bit more mainstream and a bit more functional for movement and coordinate it with exercise. So that's what we set out to do. Along the way, we had people coming to us, other trainers, saying, how do I learn what you guys know? I want to become, a diastasis pelvic floor person. So that's what prompted us to create our education, which you came to our course. And yeah, so it's kind of been an evolution of not anything that was intentional. It just has kind of grown organically, and the world of pelvic health has definitely exploded over the last 5 years.
Yes.
3 to 5 years really. And we're super proud to have been kind of we consider ourselves some of the pioneers in terms
Absolutely.
of starting to create that movement. And it's really exciting to see all the people that have now embraced it and how much more mainstream it's becoming. And in October, Sam and Julia actually stepped down from their roles in the business. Julia has her own private physiotherapy practice, and Samantha was transitioning more into working with kind of 40 plus women. And really the business didn't necessarily sustain 3 people being in it all the time. So I took that over and brought it into my own. And yeah, so what I do is I have online programs, and I have online coaching for women, and I also have the education piece for professionals. And then we have the Bellies Inc. wrap products that are also still sold. So kind of trying to cover the full gamut as much as I can.
I love it. It's so amazing because so important to have this information, like you said, just exploded, which is great because, 22 years ago when I had my daughter, I didn't have this education. I didn't have this information. I had certain things that were passed down, certainly from my grandmother and my mother. But, to have this preparation now for women is just unbelievable. So, and we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the other things that, like you said, your coaching and so on, so we can go into the full details there.
Sure.
We have a lot to cover today, but first I want to talk about exactly what pelvic floor dysfunction is. Can you explain that?
Yeah, for sure. And I, of course, have my trusty pelvis with me here
Perfect.
to give you a bit of a visual, but don't go too far without it. So we're talking about the bone. This is the bony scaffolding of our pelvis, and we're talking about the group of muscles that would close off the base of the pelvis. And the roles of the pelvis, the pelvic floor muscles, are to support our spine and pelvis, to help keep our internal organs, so bladder, uterus, rectum, up in place. It plays a role in our sexual satisfaction or lack thereof, so sexual response. It also plays a role in helping us with our continence, so we need to be able to distinguish between the difference of pee, poo, fart, and is it okay to let any of those go?
Right.
And do we have the opportunity to control those, basically, and hold them in until it's an appropriate time to let it go. So super important jobs that we don't necessarily think about until maybe some aspect of our pelvic floor is not working as it should. And then because it affects so many things in our life, it starts to become one of the only things that we're thinking about.
Right.
And so common signs of dysfunction, or common signs of challenges or signals that your body might be sending you saying it needs some help, The most common that you may hear about, especially in media, is stress urinary incontinence or peasing. Some people call it sneeze pee. And that's statistically about 1 in 3 women. I think it's a little bit more than that, but it's very common.
Right.
There's also urge urinary incontinence. So where you're sitting fine, or you're driving home from work and you're fine, and then as soon as you get out of the car and you're walking to the door, or as soon as you're walking towards the bathroom, all of a sudden it just becomes this overwhelming urge, and sometimes an inability to control, and it just is a complete empty of the bladder. It could be pain syndrome. So there can be painful sex, there can be pain around the pelvis, in the pelvic floor, in the vagina. There can also be pelvic organ prolapse, where the bladder, uterus, rectum, sometimes all of them may be shifting out of their optimal alignment, and they can start to descend into or bulge into the vagina. So those are the most common ones, I would say. Chronic back pain, chronic low back pain, you can put into there as well. There's a huge correlation between low back pain and pelvic floor dysfunction. So those are the most common. The other side that, I've kind of covered in my work is diastasis recti, which is, it's not considered a pelvic floor dysfunction.
Right.
It's a maybe a core dysfunction, and it's more associated with the abdominal wall. But I believe there's a strong correlation between what's happening in the pelvis and what's happening in the abdominal wall as well. So yeah, so that's kind of the central area that I cover.
Perfect. Yeah. And we're going to talk into detail a little bit more about some of those dysfunctions as well. I mean, and so important to talk about because, so many people suffer in silence. I know that I did for such a long time. It becomes a lot of embarrassment around it, a lot of shame, what's happening to my body, all of these things that really come up that can really create some other issues, even depression, it can lead to because of what's happening. So we're going to look at some things that we can help to resolve that, and how you help to resolve your clients to do those things. So when we come back, we're going to get into that on Shaping Life.
Awesome.
I'm your host, Erica Lita, and this is What Matters on TCN Network. What I do every week is I cover what matters to our audience.
So I love this, Kim. This is the message that you send out consistently. Light bladder leakage is not just part of being a woman. And this is something that you were saying, that we just come to think, okay, well, we're getting older, or I've had a baby, so this is just my fate and my lot in life. But it's not. So I was hoping you could start to talk about, posture, weak glutes, some of the things that contribute to that.
Yeah, for sure. I do share that message a lot, I think, because it's shared in media so vividly, and there's pad companies that are promoting their products, of course, and there is a need for them on a temporary basis. And what I hope is that women, if they are using those products, that they view it as something that's just being used while they seek help, and ideally actually transition away from the pad companies and doing something, either the reusable pads or the reusable underwear that can help instead, and then also be looking at what can be helping the problem rather than just putting a pad in and masking that symptom. So posture is a huge one, and actually I'll show you my other pelvis here first. So here's the bones in our pelvis. So it's not one big fixed bone. We have joints. So here at the back, this is our sacrum, and then at the base of it, we have our tailbone. And these are your SI joints, and there's a little bit of movement here. There shouldn't be a ton, but we should have some. And then at the front, this is our pubic joint. Again, it's not a fixed bone. It's actually an intersection or a joint there. And there's two sit bones. So those are the attachment points of our muscles. And if we are chronically, I'm going to turn it this way. Here's your sacrum and your tailbone here. If we are sitting in kind of a tucked position, or if we stand in a tucked position, and especially if we have our sacrum on a chair, like on a surface of a chair, we kind of lock that joint in place. And what happens over time is these muscles, so the attachment between the pubic joint and the tailbone, the group of muscles starts to shorten and hold on to more tension. When we're in more of a neutral pelvis, which would be more here, and the sacrum is out from under us, the pelvic floor has an opportunity to be at its optimal resting length. Mm-hmm. And why that's important is if you can equate it to, I always equate it to a bicep. So pretend this is my pelvic floor muscle, pubic joint, tailbone, and when I'm in good posture, neutral pelvis, my muscle's at its optimal resting length. And when it is needed to contract, often quite quickly but strongly in terms of a sneeze or laughing or jumping or something like that, mm-hmm. it has its full opportunity to contract and then relax. But if I was to have my arm partially contracted, or my pelvic floor partially contracted, or if it's shortening and holding on to tension, mm-hmm. and then later on, after it's been doing this for a while, it's kind of tired, it's a bit sore, it's now kind of tight. Mm-hmm. And when it's called upon, there isn't much force generation left because it's already used up a lot of its movement. And it's also tired and it's kind of achy. And so it sort of tries, but it can't quite respond. And often that's when the leaks start to happen.
Okay, right.
And the other reason why it's important, I'll show you this one now. So here's that same pelvis. There's the pubic joint in front. There's the tailbone and the sacrum in the back. And if we're sitting in that tucked position, then pay attention to the bladder here. It loses the support of the bony scaffolding and it relies only on the muscles and ligaments, which are there for that job, but they like the support of the pelvis. So when we are actually in a neutral pelvis position, the bladder has a bit of a shelf to sort of rest on. And then the uterus, which is there as well, also has a bit of support underneath as well. So when we are standing and sitting in neutral pelvis, doesn't have to be like this 24/7, but for the majority of our day, we want to have the pelvis in a more neutral position as opposed to a more tucked position.
Right.
And the other, you mentioned glutes, the other thing that happens when we are in that tucked position is the glutes, which are on either side here, they start to become inhibited. Mm-hmm. And a lot of women will also say, well, I used to have a booty, but now I just have a very flat bum.
Right.
And part of that is because they've been conditioned, their body has adapted to a tucked under pelvis position and the glutes aren't able to be used as much. And so they start to kind of atrophy almost and flatten out. So in terms of pelvic health, we want to hold our skeleton in a neutral pelvis as much as possible. And we want to do exercises that really build up our glutes to help keep that sacrum pulled out from under us. Right. And all of that will translate into better opportunities for the pelvic floor to help in the jobs that it has.
I love it. And those are simple things that can be done with simple exercises to retrain and so on. And we're going to get into that. Can you talk about the core four for us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we were starting to create our education, we were looking at the relationship between the abdominal wall and the pelvic floor. Mm-hmm. And we were looking at how there's a tremendous interaction between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. And Julie Wiebe, who's a physiotherapist in California, was one of the first ones to talk about it. And she mentioned it as a piston and said, like there's this dance that the diaphragm and pelvic floor are doing all day long with each in-breath, diaphragm comes down, it asks the pelvic floor to lengthen, it also asks the abdominal wall to expand. And then on the contraction or on the exhalation, the pelvic floor is contracting and lifting, the diaphragm's going back up, and the belly naturally draws in.
Right.
There's also muscles along the spine called the multifidus. And so the diaphragm, pelvic floor, transversus, and multifidus all make up what we consider that inner core unit and what we call the core four. And that relationship, so the posture that we just talked about is really key, because if the pelvis is in neutral and stacked underneath the diaphragm, then this relationship can happen beautifully.
Right.
But if we are sitting in a tucked under position and our muscles start to shorten, or if we're constantly gripping in our abdominal wall, thinking, like a lot of women in particular, often hold their core all day. That interferes with the ability of the diaphragm to come down. So when the diaphragm is limited, and if the pelvic floor is chronically contracted, or if the abdomen is chronically contracted, our breath won't be as deep.
Right.
The pelvic floor won't go through its beautiful relationship with the diaphragm. And then any element of those the core four can start to become inhibited. And that can interfere, again, from a core perspective, a core function perspective. We need them all to have their synergy and work in a coordinated way.
Yes.
And if something interrupts it, then that's when signs and symptoms can start to show up.
Okay. And so can you talk about this in relation to kegels and core breath and so on?
Yeah. So core breath is really a term that we started to apply to kegels. And the reason we wanted to use that term was to get people aware of the relationship between the breath and the pelvic floor, and that the pelvic floor is part of the core. And so kegels and core breath are essentially the same. And basically what we teach is kegels coordinated with the breath. A kegel exercise most people view as just squeeze your vagina.
Right.
And a lot of people say, well, I'm sitting at every red light and I'm squeezing. But studies have shown that most women are doing kegels incorrectly.
Yes.
And it's way more than just the squeeze. So there's a drawing together of the edges of our pelvic floor, and then there's a lift that needs to happen. And then there's a letting go. And it's often the letting go piece that people have the bigger challenge with. But essentially what we do is, on the in-breath, we make sure that people can expand and lengthen and relax their pelvic floor and their abdominal wall, so that we get that nice expansion.
Right.
And then on the exhalation, to harness the natural movement, the upward lift and contraction of the pelvic floor, we're going to add on a voluntary pelvic floor contraction. And we have all sorts of different cues that we use. So there's one that is, the common one is pick up a blueberry with your vagina and your anus.
Yes,
another one,
which I love that one. That one works for me.
That's yours. Okay. Yeah. And that's a good point, right? There's some people hate blueberries and they'll never imagine picking it up with their vagina and anus. And so they might do better with a milkshake or a jellyfish cue, or there's lots of different cues out there. But basically we want to ask the pelvic floor to grasp something, or to contract and then lift. And then we say, put the blueberries back down as a whole blueberry. So don't pick them up and squeeze the heck out of them. Just pick them up, put them back down. And done over time, that's what a kegel should be: a contract and lift and a letting go.
Yes.
And done repeatedly over time, it's very effective. So kegels work when they're done correctly, when they're done consistently. And then we also took it a step forward and apply it to movement, so that it needs to be coordinated with movement as well. So the core breath really is the foundation of the core retraining work that we do. So working with women who have incontinence or organ prolapse or chronic back pain, we want to get the posture and alignment. We want to get their breath going, and then we want to coordinate it into movement.
Love it. Okay, so you have a great video that you posted about that. You described it so clearly, but we're going to just close the segment with a video you posted on your Instagram page about how to do a Kegel properly, and then we'll be back on Shaping Life.
How I like to teach a Kegel, I have my vulva puppet here. I coordinate it with the breath. It's why I like to call Kegels the core breath. So when you take an in-breath, inhale and expand, I want you to imagine that your vulva is blossoming open. And then as you exhale, I want you to imagine that the edges are coming together and then drawing up and in towards the body. And then with the inhale, you let that go and you blossom again. So let's try that together. Inhale and expand. Exhale, draw those edges together. Lift up and into the body. And then inhale, blossom, and let it go. So Kegels can be done 3 sets of 10 10-second holds 3 times a day. It's also good to practice doing quick contract, release, contract, release, contract, release. Have fun.
At Benjamin Law, we understand the real cost of personal injuries. As the victim of an accident, you may be the one who's physically hurt, but your main concern is that your family are the ones who will pay the price. Benjamin Law will be there for you, helping, supporting, and working tirelessly to resolve your personal injury case. Call 1-855-899-4878 or visit benjaminlaw.ca and let our family of lawyers help your family.
Good. So we closed off very nicely there, Kim, talking about that transition of being able to incorporate core breath with movement. And so a big portion of the course and the education that you provide is that what you alluded to before was the core training versus core retraining, which is so important. So can you talk about that with us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were, when we were starting our course, we recognized that there's a lot of core training. Core has been a buzzword in fitness for many, many years. And when we looked at the pregnant person and also the postpartum people who had these challenges, who were often going from 0 to 60. So they would wait for their 6-week green light, and then they would go back to either what they were doing before, or they would have chosen something that's even harder because they're now feeling like they're carrying extra weight, they feel weaker, they want to get strong, they want to do it fast and quick. So they would often choose things like boot camp or CrossFit, and nothing wrong with those exercises per se, but in the postpartum body, especially at 6 weeks, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done from the inside out until the body is ready to withstand the loads of those additional, those more challenging exercises. So we wanted to look at core training, and what we were doing was technically core training, but we wanted to kind of reframe the word and say we're actually retraining it because we've been pregnant. There's been stretch to the abdominal wall. There's been stretch to the pelvis, especially if you've had a vaginal birth. There's been potentially incision if you've had cesarean birth. There's change in the posture. There's been a whole bunch of changes that have influenced the ability of that relationship between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor to happen. And if we give birth, we wait for 6 weeks, we then go back to a heavily loaded, very challenging, demanding activity. When that core is not yet able to withstand or manage those loads, then that's when things like prolapse can start to show up, or the leaking can start to happen.
Yes.
And so we wanted to make sure that people understood the philosophy of, first of all, prepare for your recovery, be intentional during those first 8 weeks postpartum with starting your core retraining there, and work with a pelvic floor physiotherapist, and make sure that you're gradually progressing back to, rather than just going right into what you used to do. There has to be an element of retraining the anticipatory element of the core, the coordination, the timing, the synergy, gradually adding it into movement. And a lot of people who do that, they end up returning back to their activities stronger than they were before they got pregnant. And a lot of people think that, oh, well, I'm never going to be as strong now because I've been pregnant or because I've had 3 babies or whatever it is. But a lot of people had never paid attention to their core in that way before. And when they do, they run faster, They run with less injury. They pick up heavier weights. They just have more freedom in their movement and often are exceeding their goals. So it can be really, really powerful. And it's not just applied to a postpartum recovery. It could be somebody who's never been pregnant, who is in menopause, who is now struggling. The same principles of core retraining and gradually progressing back apply.
Right. Love it. And you have a great demo here as well that we're going to show in a moment about pressure, called a pressure management push-up, which utilizes all of those things. So let's have a look at that.
So we're going to talk about push-ups. Push-ups are an exercise that not everybody loves to do, but a lot of people love to do. And if you have prolapse or if you have incontinence, sometimes the execution of the push-up might contribute to some symptoms. So I'm just going to show you a couple of modifications for push-ups and then a nice stretch afterwards. So typically push-ups are done, as we know, with a mat, and you can have your legs extended or you can have your knees down. But again, that might contribute to some sensations of pressure. So what we're going to do is start to bring our body up, and we're going to take out some of the influences of gravity. And on this one, I'm using a bench, and I am going to have my knees down. You can also do this with your knees up. And we want to coordinate the breath to offset the pressure. So the first way we're going to do is we're going to inhale as we come down, and then we're going to exhale and engage, and then push back up. For some, it might be they want to exhale at the top and hold it for the movement. So inhale and expand, exhale and engage, down and up, while keeping that engagement the entire time. So play around with that and see if that helps you manage.
So I love that. That's a great quick, description there, showing us exactly how to incorporate the breath with our movement. And I found even just incorporating some of the things I learned from all of you was, just like you said, how much more powerful you actually do become, more mindful, because now that pressure is taken away from other areas of the body. So you can really now start to utilize the proper, engage the proper muscles that you really want to. And it's changed everything.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's kind of, people think of it as people think of it as leaking urine, and that is that is what can leak out. But I say too, you're leaking out power, and you're leaking out confidence, and you're leaking out opportunity, really. And so when you can gather and close off and hold and manage that pressure from leaking out, it creates more opportunity, it creates more strength, creates more power, and you have your confidence again.
Absolutely. And again, that fear is gone. I've had so many days myself of walking to the gym thinking, oh man, like I just really hope I don't, squirt out a little pee today when I'm doing my workout. And, to now have that almost 100% alleviated is like unbelievable, because I never thought that would happen after 22 years.
So it's never too late. That's a really good message.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's transition now and talk about pain with sex, because that's obviously a huge issue as well. Can you go into some detail about why that becomes an issue?
Yeah, there's many different contributors, and what I say in support of what Julia always says as well is that it's one of her favorite things to treat as an internal pelvic floor physiotherapist, and it is very treatable. So again, it's something that women suffer with, they deal with, they think they have to live with, and they get told messages like it's just in your head, or have a glass of wine, or just try to relax, and which those are disempowering messages that aren't really helpful. So some of the contributing causes, it can be actually from that posture that we were talking about before. So if you are chronically sitting or standing in a tucked, and especially for long periods of time, and those muscles are adapting to a shortened state, then they will be holding on to more tension. And when it comes time to, especially if it's penetrative sex, the inability of the muscles to relax and let go to accommodate something potentially going in can be quite painful. And then, so if that has happened, then there can also develop out of that the fear of penetration. Right. And so then that can create other issues. There's pain with, so dyspareunia is the term associated with pain with sex. And there's also other dynias, like there's vulvodynia, which is sort of pain in the vulva, and sometimes there's no visible reason why there should be pain, but there is. It can be vestibulodynia, which is more so the vestibule, or the kind of the entrance to the vagina. So nothing's painful around it, but there can be pain right at the entrance. There are some people who have pain that anything that touches the vulva can create pain syndrome. So it can be easy to treat, but it also can be a little bit complex as well. So a lot of it is down regulating sometimes an upcharge system. So it can be breath work, posture work. It can be kind of gradually introducing, so things like dilators, they're called. So they're sort of almost like a set of, they kind of look like gradually increasing size of tubes. And what they do is people who may have a fear of penetration, or maybe they have some atrophy, so especially women who've now been gone through menopause, and maybe the tissues are starting to become less supple, they may need something to kind of help reintroduce something bigger so that they can accommodate that again. So there's lots of different techniques, lots of reasons why it can happen. I always personally, from my point of view, certain, like if they have sort of pain maybe by their tailbone, or they have SI joint pain, then I'll use some of the release exercises with them and look at posture. But I mean, I'm always referring everybody to a pelvic floor physiotherapist, but definitely people who come and have pain with sex or pain within their pelvis, I'm 1,000,000,000% always referring on to pelvic floor physio to make sure that can be addressed. It can be scar tissue from surgeries, or there's lots of different reasons, and pelvic floor physio is, in my opinion, the best route.
Love it. Okay, wonderful. So that's great advice, and like you said, always something to pair with the work that you're doing with yourself, but also seeking that professional help as well on that side of things.
Totally.
Can you talk about vaginal dryness? Like, can that also play a role as well? Can you talk about that?
For sure. Yeah. So the most common, I would say, you can have dryness when you're breastfeeding, so postpartum, but I'd say the most common population that is dealing with dryness is either post-surgery or in menopause. So sometimes leading up to menopause, but most commonly post-menopausal women. So as our estrogen levels are declining and eventually we stop producing estrogen, the estrogen is responsible for sort of the juiciness. It's responsible for a lot of things, but it helps keep that suppleness in our pelvis, in our vagina, and the vaginal walls. And when the estrogen is no longer present, then the tissues can start to become less supple. They sort of dry out. And there's a term now called genitourinary syndrome of menopause, which talks about kind of the atrophy, the dryness, some people notice that there's just less space in there, and there's more irritation. They're more prone to infection. And yeah, so what you have up on the screen here, this is something that I speak a lot with Shirley Weir from Menopause Chicks, and speak often at Pure Pharmacy, which is here in BC. And they compounded the pure, no pun intended, but a really clean formulation of hyaluronic acid. So we have hyaluronic acid in our body that we produce and make up until about age 40. And when we can reintroduce that, so a lot of skin creams, a lot of facial treatments all use hyaluronic acid because it's moisture retaining. And the cool thing about hyaluronic acid is if you have been experiencing this, it's never too late to address it, but you can use it and it helps heal tissue that has already been kind of irritated or sore. And it also helps then retain more moisture. And so Shirley has been recommending this to many of her community, in Menopause Chicks community, and she was thinking, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month, they might start to notice a difference, but there's been people within days that are noticing a significant difference, and it's life-changing. It's life-changing for women to have that. And It's not to be confused with, it's not a lubricant. So the lubricants are, if you're going to be having sexual intercourse particularly, or any sort of sex, you would want to have a lubricant, ideally a water-based one, but then every night be putting in your hyaluronic acid, and the two together it's life-changing. It really is. It's amazing.
Fantastic, fantastic. When we come back, I want you to talk about pleasure kegels as well, because that's also something that can contribute. So we'll see you soon on Shaping Life.
Are you retiring smart? Make your home's equity work for you. With your home's equity and our 30 years of experience, the Retire Smart Properties team can help you achieve the quality of life you've always wanted. Our services are 360 degrees. We'll give you advice, take care of staging and selling, and help you find the perfect home and community to transition to. It's time to enjoy the retirement lifestyle you deserve. Visit our website today to learn how you can use your home to retire comfortably. The Retire Smart Properties team, powered by RE/MAX West.
So yes, I love this post. So I want you to talk about this, Kim. Pleasure kegels. Can you get into that?
Yeah. So this is a self-pleasure device called the Empress by a company called Vush. And they had approached me and asked if I would make a post using their product, and or not using it, but told me not to. And I absolutely. So first of all, I tried it myself, and I won't support anything that I don't either use or believe is something that
Right.
is beneficial. So I always try everything first, and I really liked it. It did the job, but one thing that came to mind is that I'm often experimenting with pelvic floor, and I use my husband as biofeedback, and it's just because that's the world that I live in. But when you're having sex, whether it's by yourself or with a partner, or whether it's a male partner or not, whether they have a penis or fingers or another toy, it doesn't matter. But that is feedback for your pelvic floor. So when there is something inserted into the vagina, that can provide feedback for you to be able to see, can I hug it?
Absolutely.
Can I kind of gently draw it in? And can I let that go? And so if you're with a partner, you can ask your partner for that feedback. Can they feel it on their fingers? Can they feel it on their penis? Or there are biofeedback devices that you can use as well if it's just yourself.
Right.
So that's one piece. You can bring it into sex, and that can heighten your awareness and your pleasure as well. I'm not touting this as for the benefit of a partner per se, but it can be.
Right.
But it helps stimulate your receptors. It helps you engage more. It helps you, and I don't mean engage in the muscles, I just mean be engaged more. You're feeling more. But even if you're doing it from a self-pleasure perspective, so using something like a vibrator or the Empress, then again, it kind of heightens that sensation and can contribute to whether it's, if you want to, you could potentially achieve orgasm quicker, or it's a more powerful orgasm. And an orgasm is kind of like the ultimate kegel. Then you have that involuntary contract and relax at the pelvic floor. And especially people who are more prone to tension, orgasm can be a really great release, and it can kind of let you have that sense of letting go. So it can be a really great, rather than sitting and doing kegels 3 sets of 10 second holds, why don't you do it while you have a self-pleasure session? And,
Absolutely.
And you're
much more exciting.
Way more exciting. Yeah, it's super beneficial.
I love it. Okay, so let's pop back just for a moment to pelvic organ prolapse. You talked about that briefly, and again, another issue that many people face. Can you briefly touch on that?
Yeah, so I always use my clothing to kind of demonstrate this. But if you can imagine that this is the vagina, we have an anterior wall, we have a posterior wall of the vagina. Up top here would be the cervix and the uterus. And in organ prolapse, one or sometimes all or two of the organs can start to shift out of their optimal position. So from a uterus perspective, the uterus can start to descend into the vagina. In the bladder perspective, the bladder can start to bulge into the anterior wall, and eventually, if it was extreme, it could bulge right down to the entrance to the vagina. And on the posterior wall, it can be the rectum that creates a little bulge into the wall.
Right.
And so from a statistic perspective, over 50% of women have some degree of prolapse. And there was a recent study, I don't have the name unfortunately, but it was looking at the early postpartum period. And 83% of women in those first, I can't remember how many weeks, but early weeks postpartum had some degree of prolapse. And 50% of that 83%, close to 50% of that 83%, had a stage 2 or greater.
Wow.
And so how they grade prolapse is grade 1. If you were to look inside, you would hardly see anything.
Okay.
A grade 2 would be a tiny bit of a bulge, and it would generally be about 2 centimeters away from the entrance to the vagina.
Okay.
A stage 3 would be where the bulge comes right to the entrance, and a stage 4 would be where it's actually right out.
Wow.
And so to say that a huge percentage of people in the early weeks postpartum have a stage 2 or greater, and there's no screening that's happening for it. There's no awareness about this. There's no recovery protocol. And so a lot of women are unaware, and especially the women then who go back to the gym at 6 weeks postpartum, some even sooner, and they're starting to add the more challenging movements, then I feel like that's contributing to an exacerbation of that prolapse. And if we spent more time gradually returning and more healing practices specifically for prolapse, I think that it would become less of an issue, and it would become less common. So I have a stage 2 rectocele. So my rectum bulges into the posterior wall of my vagina.
Okay.
I didn't know about organ prolapse until after my second was born. I knew all about incontinence. That was the main thing that I had heard about. That's what I was trying to prevent. I was trying to prevent tearing, but I had never heard of organ prolapse before.
Right.
And then when I went to my physiotherapist the first time, I had no external tearing from birth, but I actually had internal tearing, which I think most women have some degree of internal tearing.
Sure.
And so I had quite a bit of scar tissue inside, and right at the site where my vagina bulges into my rectum, that's where all of that scar tissue is. So it kind of created a weakness there. And you know, it's part of the reason why I promote pelvic floor physio as every single woman should go, especially women who've been pregnant, and go at around 6 or 8 weeks postpartum and become informed, know what you're dealing with, and then you have an opportunity to heal. And so had I known sooner, maybe it would be different, maybe not, who knows.
Sure.
But the other thing is I have virtually no symptoms. So it's often asymptomatic, and another reason why you want to go see the physio proactively, just like we see the dentist, even if we don't have a toothache, we want to see a pelvic floor physio, even if we have no symptoms, to help screen for that. And and symptoms aren't indicative of the stage. They aren't indicative of having anything wrong or not. So it's super important. But yeah, prolapse is, it's one of the more challenging to deal with. It really, really affects the mindset. It's very devastating for women. Bladder and uterine, when caught at an earlier stage, so stage 1 and 2, can be potentially reversed or maybe even brought up a stage. Rectal are a little more challenging to change, and they often stay where they are.
Okay.
But you need the awareness, you know, how to manage them.
Right.
Once a prolapse is kind of a stage 3 or 4, there's I don't know of anybody who has reversed that through exercise and what have you. But there's definitely things you can do to manage. So pessaries are an option. Hypopressive exercises are really, really super beneficial for prolapse and incontinence, but definitely for prolapse. So yeah, so it can be really devastating, but there's, I lift heavy, I run, I do things. When you have the right, when you pay attention to your pelvic floor and help optimize it and keep it healthy, there's no reason. Movement is beneficial. You need to move.
Right. I love that message. And again, the education piece. And then, like you said, it may not be able to be healed, but we can manage and we can learn to live with, improvements and create improvements in our lives. So that's amazing. I also love this, Kim, you have something called a Buff Muff Challenge. So can you talk about that?
What I recognized when I had created this online program that called Kegel Mojo, and it basically took all of everything that I would teach somebody in sort of 4 to 6 sessions. So when I'm working in a coaching practice with somebody, and I wanted to make it more accessible to people who either weren't in person or who didn't want to do coaching online or whatever. So it was something that was taking a bunch of stuff and putting it in one place. And people liked it, but there wasn't a lot of people actually putting into practice what was in there. All of the exercises, I had PDF workouts, and people were saying, well, I just don't remember to go do my exercises, or they needed still a little bit more help. And so I partnered with this company in Montreal called Obi, and they help fitness professionals create challenges. And what they had recognized was that when there's a start and end date to something, and when there's a common goal, and when there's a community, and when they are rewarded with, satisfaction of checking something off the list, people are more engaged and more likely to comply. And so that was the missing piece for me. And I said, okay, let's do this. And I took many of the exercises from the Kegel Mojo program and laid them out into a 28-day challenge. So people have 5 things to do each day, 2 of which are down training. So the release and the stretching. And then there's 3 that are up training, and they're all coordinated with movement. And there's little bits of education kind of filtered through, but I've done it for just over a year now. And so there's been about 1,000 people that have gone through it, and the results are amazing. Like I knew it would be a kind of more accepted than the full program, but I didn't quite think that many people would engage so well with it. And Buff Muff is fun. People like a fun name here and there.
Yeah, totally.
And so everyone's like, yeah, I want a Buff Muff. Okay, sign up. And so it's accessible because most people have their phone. It gives you your reminders. It tells you exactly what to do. There's gamification because you check off what you've done and you earn points, and that unlocks bonus content. So it kind of keeps people engaged, and it's only $27. So it's financially accessible to most people as well. I also learned that women are, we will often wait 7 years before we actually do something about our pelvic challenges.
That is the truth.
And if it was something that men were dealing with their pelvic health, they would wait 7 seconds probably. But, so women they're not necessarily ready to spend a whole bunch of money on this. They're already kind of unsure, and they don't really want to admit it yet, or they're not sure if it's going to work. And so I needed to make something that was accessible to kind of the masses, and this definitely helped. And then people graduate on to going to the full program if they want more, or they come into coaching from there. But the Buff Muff is really, I love it. It's my favorite thing. And there's one going on right now. I run one every month. So the first Tuesday of every month, a new one starts.
Great.
And there's a chat function with the community. So it's super fun.
Love it. I love it. And you've also co-authored and authored some books. You have Prepare to Push, Your Pelvic Floor, and Pregnancy Fitness. So those are all available as well through Amazon. I think also on your website. Which is great. Yep,
you can actually get a free download on the website right now if you want to head over to vaginacoach.com. There's free copies of each of them, which is nice. And and then Pregnancy Fitness was one that the 3 of us in Bellies Inc. did together, which was that was a lot of work, but we love it. We're super proud of that book.
Amazing. I love it. And again, the education that's available to everyone is so fantastic, and a huge must. I'm living testament. So, and I've seen all the comments, even from your Kegel Mojo program and the Buff Muff Challenge and all those things that you run. So, going to your website, people can find you there to do. You still have your Prepare to Push program. You have your, as we mentioned, your Kegel Mojo program, online coaching, so on, and also even the ability to get certified as a core confidence specialist, which you're still doing all over Canada. And do you run these in the States as well, or?
Yeah, we have a master trainer. She's running one in Alaska actually in March, and we're hoping to bring it to New York and California as well. And but people can do them online as well. So if people don't want to travel, or if they're not in a city, then we have them both. The pre-postnatal and the core confidence specialist are both available online too. So yeah.
Amazing, amazing. So just a quick review and recap, Kim, tips for optimal pelvic floor health. Can you run down a few of those here?
Yeah, so obviously posture is always a big one for me. So that's the very first thing that I look at when I'm working with somebody, and the first thing that I address in any of my challenges or my programs. Getting the posture first, getting people aware of how they're holding themselves and how it influences their breath and the relationship between the pelvic floor. Getting them to do the core breath or the kegels, or potentially doing the challenge that gets them into the habit of paying attention to activating their pelvic floor with movement each day. I always incorporate a lot of glute work in there, as I mentioned before. So lots of squats and bridges, and those are easy to adapt with the core breath or with kegels as well. And then hands down, the number one thing that I have been screaming from the rooftops for 15 years is every single woman should see a pelvic floor physiotherapist annually, even if you have no symptoms.
Love it. That's amazing. Kim, I could sit here and pick your brain for the next 5 hours, and I wish I could. But you gave us such incredible information today, and I hope that everyone with a vagina and without a vagina watches this today and gets that education that they need. So thank you again for taking the time, and I really appreciate you being here today.
I really appreciate having me and helping spread the word. And yeah, even if it's somebody without a vagina, they probably know somebody with, so
that's
they can
right.
pass on the message to them. So yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you so much. Okay, so everyone, I hope you got what you needed today. And of course, as I said, you can go to Kim's websites as well, vaginacoach.com, bellyzinc.com for more information. And we'll see you next week on Shaping Life.